Suddenly Conrad beheld a ghostly, black and white panorama, seemingly too dark to be real. 10,000 shadows inside 10,000 craters. Conrad felt a stab of unease. He couldn't find a single feature that he recognized, but when he sighted along the 40-degree mark on his window, suddenly, hey, 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 there it is! There it is! Son of a gun, right down the middle of the road! Far into the distance, Conrad could see the snowman, tiny, almost lost in the sea of craters. Intrepid was headed for the very center of the Surveyor crater. Even as Bean tried to read him LPD angles, Conrad was too excited to listen. Look out there, I can't believe it. Fantastic! But the targeting was almost too good. Conrad wasn't about to land in the middle of the Surveyor crater. As the computer flew Intrepid down, Conrad told it to shift the aim point short and to the right of the crater. He would give Pete's parking lot a try after all. He heard Jerry Carr's voice. Intrepid, Houston, go for landing. 1,000 feet above the moon, Bean stole a glance out of his window and saw a bright field of craters, with the Surveyor crater as big as life directly ahead. They were coming in at great speed. Up to now, the landing had seemed like a simulation, but this was almost more than he could stand to look at. It was amazing, even frightening. Quickly he turned his gaze back to the instruments. His voice was calm as he told Conrad, "Looks good out there, babe, looks good." But Pete's parking lot didn't look very good to Conrad. It looked more like Pete's battlefield. Again he shifted the landing point, this time further downrange. "You're at 530 feet, Pete," called Bean. "You all right?" But they were still coming in like a bullet. Conrad wanted time to slow down and look for a landing spot, and he could afford to. They were fat on fuel. As Intrepid descended through 400 feet, Conrad took over. He pitched the craft back to kill their forward speed. Intrepid slowed, but not as soon as Conrad actually wanted. He saw the Surveyor crater drift past and said, "Gosh, I flew by it." Conrad looked to his left just beyond the crater's northwest rim and saw where he wanted to land, a smooth area between Surveyor crater and Head crater. He banked Intrepid hard to the left. The craft responded with the same sluggishness as the LLTV at Ellington. Bean, who had never flown the landing trainer, was surprised to see the 8-ball in front of him tilt so sharply. He wondered what Conrad was doing. He said in a calm Texas drawl, "Hey, you're really maneuvering around." "Yep," Conrad answered, too busy to say anything more. "Come on down, Pete," Bean coached, his eye on the rate of descent gauge. Bean knew that Conrad must not descend too slowly while they were this high up. It would cost too much fuel. 200 feet, coming down at 3, Bean said. "Need to come on down." "Okay," Conrad answered. In the simulator, he had always waited until they were down to 100 feet or so before arresting the last bit of forward speed and starting the final vertical descent. But some instinct now prompted him to level off early. It was the best decision that he made, because within moments his view of the surface began to blur. Intrepid was kicking up a tremendous amount of dust, far more than Armstrong and Aldrin's move had suggested. The dust shot away from him in bright streaks, rushing to the horizon. 96 feet, coming down at 6. "Slow down the descent rate," Bean called quickly and urgently. The dust blanket thickened. Conrad could see nothing but streaks, with a few rocks sticking up here and there. He had no idea whether there were any craters directly underneath him, but he would have to take his chances. "Looking real good," said Bean, his eyes glued to the gauges. 50 feet coming down. Watch for the dust." Bean didn't see the dust storm already raging outside his window. Still Intrepid crept downward. Conrad's eyes flicked back and forth between the window and the instruments. It was absolutely the worst way to have to fly, with his attention split. But he had no choice. The gauge that was supposed to display lateral motion seemed to be broken, forcing him to look outside to make sure he wasn't drifting sideways or even worse, backwards. 30 feet, coming down at 2. "Plenty of gas, babe. Plenty of gas." 30 seconds, warned Jerry Carr in mission control. Bean answered, "He's got it made." Conrad was now flying entirely by instruments. He had planned to wait until touchdown to shut off the engine, but suddenly he saw the blue glow of the contact light, and instinctively his hand went to the engine stop button, and Intrepid fell the last few feet to the dust with a firm thump. Conrad had logged 100 seconds of stick time, the only real flying he would get on Apollo 12, but they had required every ounce of experience from 20 years of piloting. He had landed on target. He was sure of that. And just now his friend and former student was slapping him on the back saying, "Good landing, Pete. Outstanding, man." "You're headed right square out the hatch. Wait, wait, wait. Come forward a little. There you are." With Bean giving him guidance, a fully suited Pete Conrad crawled out of Intrepid's front hatch and onto the porch. Caution dictated that he move slowly in the lunar vacuum, but Conrad was impatient. From the moment of touchdown, he couldn't wait to get outside. He had to get down to the surface and find out once and for all whether the surveyor was really there. Looking out the window, it was impossible to tell where they were. Like Armstrong and Aldrin, he and Bean couldn't gauge distances or sizes, and that made it all but impossible to figure out what craters were in front of them. But when Conrad finally stood on the top rung of the ladder, he could actually see part of the surveyor crater. In fact, he realized with a mixture of relief and alarm, he had landed Intrepid not even 10 yards from Surveyor Crater's rim. He headed down the ladder while a color TV camera broadcast the scene to Earth. Conrad knew people wouldn't remember the third man to walk on the moon. There was no need to make up something momentous to say, but he did have a quote, in fact. He had a bet to win. He had bet Oriana Fallaci that he could say whatever he wanted once he was on the moon, that it wasn't pre-planned, or that NASA had not told Neil Armstrong what to say when he first landed on the moon. So his bet was to say exactly these words. "Whoopee! Man, that may have been one small step for Neil, but it's a long one for me." Just as Neil Armstrong had done, Conrad held on with his right hand and placed his left boot onto the moon. He swirled his foot in the dust. Ooh, was that soft and queasy. I don't sink in too far. Still holding on, he planted both feet on the surface and let go. His first steps brought him into the blinding glare of the sun.